Mes amis, t'as pu écouter KVPI The Legend, 107.3 FM, 650 AM. Allons écouter quelque chose par Aldous Roger et les Lafayette Playboys.
Bonjour, I am Professor Noah Arceneaux, professor at San Diego State University. I study radio history. I've been studying radio history for almost 20 years. And a couple years ago, I decided to do a project that I'm calling the history of Cajun radio. Now, what is the definition of a Cajun? The term comes from the word Acadian, as in the Acadian French who were forcibly displaced from Canada. I think it was late 1700s, end up in Louisiana. The term Acadian becomes Cajun. What is the exact parameters and boundaries of who is and who is not a Cajun today? I don't want to get into that and the way that the term is used. But what I'm looking at specifically are radio stations in southern Louisiana that identify with and really promote and celebrate Cajun culture, including some stations that still broadcast in Louisiana French. I'm also interested in stations that play Zydeco or have Zydeco shows. Zydeco music is similar to Cajun music, a little bit different, but there's so much overlap. It felt like I had to include Zydeco radio in my study. And I'm also interested and cognizant of swamp pop. If you are not familiar with the genre of swamp pop, it's rock and roll or maybe R&B music from late 50s, early 60s from southern Louisiana, made by artists who are singing for the most part in English, but there are elements of Cajun or Creole music in swamp pop. I just heard a song yesterday called Let's Do the Cajun Twist, which is quite clearly Alonzo Lafayette. So anyway, now the purpose of this video right here is to just take a small slice of my research to help me kind of organize my thoughts. I'm also getting ready for a conference, Society for Cinema and Media Studies. That's coming up in mid-March 2024. This is a way for me to rehearse my conference presentation. I know the video is going to be long, but I can then rehearse, see what's interesting and what works, doesn't work, and then cut it down from there. In 1959, there's this master's thesis comes out of LSU by Elizabeth Roberts, French radio broadcasting in Louisiana. This is a really fantastic resource. Other than my research over the last 2 years into French language radio in Louisiana, this is like probably the only other work that I could find of any real substance. Anyway, Elizabeth Roberts identifies 21 stations that had French programming or had it in the recent past. And I know that speaking French and using French is not an exact proxy for ethnicity. I know that language is a poor way to define ethnicity, but anyway, that's what Elizabeth Roberts studied. What she found was that in the regions of Louisiana that had a heavily French influence, and she identifies this is a map. I want to think that she colored in this map herself, where there's a heavy amount of French influence, a lot of population, people who had settled there. So this is from the 1959 thesis. In 1971, the state legislature in Louisiana designates 22 parishes, they're parishes, not counties, 22 parishes as Acadiana. This is where the Acadian French from Canada, Nova Scotia, that area, this is where they settle in Louisiana. And when you look at the stations identified by Elizabeth Roberts, almost all of them are in the Acadian region. It lines up very, very nicely. We have Alexandria and Oakdale over there, which are pretty close. But for the most part, that's where the stations are. And what did Roberts find? She found the amount of French spoken on the air varied from as many as 30 minutes was a minimum up to 18 hours per week. The bulk of the programming was music, but there was news. There was a fair amount of news. Weekend religious programming was Catholic and also Baptist. Historically, Cajuns are Catholic, but there was enough intermarriage and enough Baptist influence that there was a number of stations that had this French Baptist programming. Some of the stations only had commercials in French or short spots, and French was very, very popular in the early morning hours. And that is a trend that has continued to this day, very, very early in the morning. A recurring refrain that Roberts found in her interviews to go along with her research, she went out and interviewed people at these different radio stations. Many of them said that French was a dying language, was clearly on its way out. In 1959, they're saying French is a dying language, including the manager here of KVPI, Ville Platte. who's saying that French news popularity will be insufficient in 10 years to warrant a sponsor. Okay, so this is what Chris is saying. Chris Dupelshane is saying about KVPI. And there were other stations and other managers who said the same thing. They noted the influence of rock and roll, the popularity of English broadcasting on TV, and that the people who did speak French were the older people who weren't the best target audience for advertisers. They didn't have buying power, or they were just, let's face it, going to die out. So French was on its way out in 1959. So what is the situation today? Most of the stations on the list have no French programming. There's little to no connection to the local area. And what I mean by that is that if you transported this particular radio station to another part of the United States, wouldn't appreciably change what they were doing. Big formats are talk, news talk, country. Country is very popular. Country often maybe has a Cajun show on the weekend, and oldies. Two of the stations are now affiliates of Radio Marie, a Catholic network. This is Catholic programming for all of the United States, syndicated coming from somewhere else. One station, I thought this was pretty cool. One station moved, the call letters actually were sold or were transferred to Houston, Texas, and it still exists doing Vietnamese programming. KTIB in Thibodaux, the AM version of that station is now Spanish, which I think is interesting. The FM just plays adult contemporary. The French Rosary persists. This was the first thing that I found. That did kind of surprise me. I thought the religious programming was probably winding down if, you know, they were predicting the demise of French on the radio in 1959. But you still find a couple of stations doing the Rosary. It's just the Rosary, as far as I can tell, just the Rosary in French. KSLO, the AM version of that, that's a big station in Opelousas. They are an affiliate of Christ Our King, Catholic Radio for Acadiana, and they simulcast with KLFT out of Kaplan, or Kaplan simulcasts out of KSLO, something like that. They have the French language Rosary every morning at 6:30 a.m. And KSLO FM, the FM version of that, is an all Zydeco format. I thought that was pretty interesting, including a Zydeco show on Saturdays hosted by Corey Arceneaux. I thought it was very cool for me to be interviewing someone for research who also had the exact same last name, Arceneaux, who does play older Zydeco music at the beginning of his Saturday morning show, including some stuff is in French. He did clarify that for me. And we also have the French language Rosary on two stations. They have the same owner, KANE in New Iberia and KLEB in Golden Meadow. They have the same tape. It's the same programming of a French language Rosary at 5:30 a.m. Monday through Friday.
You're listening to KLEB, 1600 AM and K274DE, 102.7 FM, Golden Meadow.
I have a couple stations here that have strong local connections, and one of these is KLEB, the Ragin' Cajun. It's located way down Golden Meadow. If you don't know Louisiana, it's way down there. The host is barrel-chested, deep-voiced guy, very gregarious personality. Buddy Miller does the Hot Sauce Express, which begins right after the French language Rosary. And the beginning of his show, it's a music program. At the beginning of the show, he does speak French. He'll speak it all the way up to like 8 a.m. Maybe he wants to go a little bit later. The owner wants him to do it a little bit sooner so that the ads are in English. KLEB is the modern day incarnation of KLFT, which was one of the most prolific French language broadcasters identified in the Robert study. And when I did a visit to KLEB in the past year or two, they had a sign up acknowledging that, sort of being proud of that heritage and that connection. Golden Motors, local car dealership, consistently has commercials in French. As far as I can tell, that's the only ad that they're consistently doing in French. There's some other ads in French, but that's the one that they still do.
Les Golden Motors. Là-bas, le prix est trop priorité pour vous autres. La location, les 32, les 300, le chemin en arrière. Et n'oubliez pas, Golden Motors, c'est trop faire de supporter toutes les organisations pour des gens dans les 10e ward et sortent le fouche. Golden Motors. And the Lario Brothers, Marine Hardware Supply, don't let me go. Et t'as chassé pour le bateau de troll, eh bien, n'oublie pas. Les pâtés quoi pour le chasser poules, tu les trouver là-dedans. Les argonautes, les locs, les lignes de pêche, un épervier, des râteaux, c'est tout à faire que tu chassé pour le bateau de troll, tu les trouver là-dedans. The Lario Brothers, The Northwest Supply, Northwest we go. Merci pour ça. C'est 10 minutes après c'est l'heure. All I want to do...
Other stations with strong local connections. KMRC, Morgan City. This is an AM station with a swamp pop format. That's what it claims, a swamp pop format. What they mean by that is that there's all Louisiana artists, also some Cajun, also some Zydeco, also some swamp pop, Johnny Allen songs, stuff like that. KEUN, Eunice, News Talk AM, FM Country. Saturdays is devoted to Cajun music. KEUN historically has been a very, very big station. And they still have some connection with playing the Cajun music on Saturdays, which is very common. There's also something, and I don't know much about this. I don't know much about this station, but it's just called itself simply Cajun Radio. It seems to be, as far as I can tell, the modern day version of two stations that were identified by Roberts, KPLC Lake Charles and KJEF in Jennings. It's sort of operating. I was listening to the stream online, but I think both stations have joined together, owned by Town Square Media, kind of operating as one. KJEF Jennings was very famous. They had a host, Jerry Dugas, who was a Saturday morning, I think a couple days a week, but Saturday was the big day, broadcasting in French, the kind of thing where everyone in town would be listening to the same program, and it was Jerry Dugas. KAPB. Okay, now this is up in Marksville, which is kind of the northern or the northeastern edge of what would be Acadiana. And I really like this station a lot. The programming is pretty much country, but the station owner really likes having this local connection. He's from Marksville. So he has a friend, a guy who has done comedy and recorded some novelty songs in the past, including the Cajun rap song. Yeah, the guy who does these announcements did the Cajun rap song. These little funny liners. And it ends with that, "Aye," that yell, whatever that yell is called, which is identifiably Cajun. And they're super, super local, super, super specific to people in Marksville who will get the jokes, talking about a specific street. One of them makes reference to the Swap Shop, which is a radio program they have on KAPB, where it's people selling goods, very much a strong local feel, very cool. And on Sundays, there's a programming with the announcing in French. Pat Tossin, local guy from Avoyelles Parish who speaks French, still does a Cajun music show and does the announcing in French on Sundays. I am going to play some liners, one or two right here, so you can get a feel for KAPB, the Cajun.
Sometimes Cajuns get a little hot under the collar.
I bought me an electric car, but the extension cord fell off on Preston Street.
97.7,
Hey!
The Cajun. Happy Halloween.
Now, you're not supposed to give unwrapped cracklings out for trick-or-treat.
From 97.7,
Hey!
The Cajun.
KVPI Ville Platte. Okay, I could do the whole conference presentation. I could do the whole presentation about KVPI because they are the coolest station, and they're the ones from the original Roberts study that are still doing a lot. Okay, they're the leaders, I would say, in commercial French language broadcasting. The AM station is mostly country. FM's classic hits. There's a French newscast. It's about 15-minute long. It starts at 7:30 a.m. Then there's this big call-in show, La Tosta Cafe. That's the most popular show on KVPI. That's the most popular show by far. They joke about doing it in Franglish. I think it used to be more French. Now it's mostly English. People go back and forth. Local people call in. They also have a Swamp Pop program and are closely associated with Swamp Pop and Floyd Swallow. Floyd Swallow worked at KVPI. He's a legendary record producer who still lives in Ville Platte and calls into La Tosta Cafe and tells a joke, plus an ad for his shop, a joke every Wednesday in French, like a little story in French. And I got the t-shirt on. Fred's Lounge, these live broadcasts, a live musical broadcast of live Cajun music out of a bar in a small town called Mamou, has been going on since the early 1960s. The Fred's Lounge broadcast started on KEUN, the station I already mentioned, and then switched over to KVPI some time ago. So KVPI, has Fred's Lounge, French Morning News, La Tosta Cafe, the connection to Swamp Pop. I really, really like what they do. And that little snippet you heard at the beginning of this video is Mark Lane from KVPI. That's his voice.
Merci, Tobin. À cette heure, c'est temps pour les nouvelles en français. Et ton host, c'est Madame Jackie Minard. Jackie?
Bonjour, mes amis. Comment ça va ce matin? C'est une belle journée pour vous. T'as écouté à KVPI le Legend AM/FM Radio dans la ville Plan. C'est 7h30. Restez tunés pour les nouvelles en français de 1 minute. Je vais te parler de Paul's Meat Market. Il a toutes sortes de bonnes spéciales aujourd'hui pour vous. Tu peux acheter des fresh fry leg quarters à 10 livres, un bag de 10 livres for $4.90 each.
Now, some stations that I ought to mention that were not part of Robert's study, but still have a strong connection to Cajun culture. KBON, KBON started, I don't know the exact year, I probably should, by Paul Marks, who was a musician and also a DJ at different Cajun stations or places where he had Cajun shows. And as the story goes, he got frustrated that he could not. He said, why do we have to relegate our music to the weekend? Why can't we have this Cajun music all week long? And people said, no, never work, never work. He bucks the trend, opens a station, does very popular, also plays Zydeco music and other, music by Louisiana artists. But on Saturday morning, there is announcing in French. They have a number of really cool shows. I think Swamp and Roll is one with Todd Ortego that play great Louisiana music. I have to mention the Mustang with Fred Charlie. Fred Charlie has been a DJ and active proponent of Cajun culture and the language for years, at least since the 1980s. He's worked at a number of stations, now at this commercial country station, and he does his full-on Cajun thing, announcing in English, some in French, kind of a back and forth. The ads are in English, but Fred Charlie's been doing a show for many years. Far and away, the leader, I say probably the most prolific French language broadcaster to the last, is KRVS. This is the NPR station and associated with the University of Louisiana Lafayette. And over the years, they have been supported by Codafil, the Council for the Development of French in Louisiana, to do, I think at one point it was 50 hours a week of French language programming. Now it's a lot. I don't think it's 50, but including this early morning music show where all the announcing is done in French and the music is in French. Bonjour Louisiane, been on the air for years. There's also programming about Zydeco music and different kinds of Louisiana music, blues music, world music, different kinds of folk music. I'm sure they got a show about roots music. So KRVS does a lot of different stuff. In conclusion, feels like I ought to have some type of conclusion to this. And I have two big concluding thoughts. But before I get into that, let me go over the limitations, the shortcomings of the study. During this presentation, it seems like I've been using a very geographically specific definition of Cajun radio. That is because this particular presentation is based on the study by Roberts and looking at the stations she found, doing kind of a before and after kind of examination. If I were to do a full comprehensive study of Cajun radio, I think the geographic boundaries would be different. I think I would certainly include some of the stuff in New Orleans. I don't want the guys at WWOZ getting mad at me about this. And I think I would also have to extend the boundary over into Texas as well, because East Texas is a pretty Cajun country over there. Also, if I were doing a complete study of Cajun radio, I'd include a lot more performers, including Alden Saunier from KSIG out of Crowley, and also Dudley LeBlanc, famous politician, entrepreneur, had a call salesman. He did a number of things, was a very colorful character, but he did a number of things, including popularizing the speaking of French on the radio and really encouraging people to embrace and support the Cajun identity before that was cool. And another performer I'd have to include would be Johnny Jono, big Cajun DJ out of Beaumont, Texas. Okay. But one of the observations that I have after doing this research is that the reasons and motivations for people continuing to speak French on radio in Louisiana has changed. When Roberts was doing her study back in the late 50s, I think some of that was done out of necessity, pure necessity, because you still had a population, maybe an aging population, but you still had a population who only spoke French. So there was a need, just a fundamental need to, broadcast in French. I think the stuff that goes on today is very much done out of what I would call ethnic pride. And it's very much a deliberate attempt to maintain and keep the language alive. On both KVPI and KLEB, for example, they do a French word of the day as a way of sort of promoting and keeping the language going. And then the other thought has to do with this whole process of assimilation and how assimilation works. you could look at this whole phenomenon, and if you wanted to focus on the forces of homogenization, consolidation, assimilation, whatever, in the late 20th, early 21st century, you could look at it as, oh, it's so sad. There's this authentic, pure, organic culture that hasn't survived. But I think Cajun culture, and like probably all cultures, right, are always alive and always mixing and always fusing with things. I would look at it as the fact that there's any French being spoken at all on the radio in Southern Louisiana is wicked cool. And if the way that it has to survive is by modifying, molding it, maybe blending a little bit with comedy, like that IE radio thing, that's okay. That's okay, because it's still managing to survive, still managing to be heard, still managing to get out there. And I'm going to close with a snippet from, it's an ad from KBON, and it is in English, but there is enough local flair there with the accent being used and the French being used and just the way it's spoken about, that people in the area distinctly know this feels authentic, this feels real, and it's kind of funny and it's kind of cute. And I like the way that the Cajun culture has survived and it comes through even in something as mundane as a radio ad for a tree service.
Hey, Todd Artigo here, sitting with my friend Sterling Burley Jr. from the Villepinte area. You know him as T. Cajun K-Ball.
But Todd, you know him from Los de Belanek.
Yeah, I know that, but T, I understand you recently hired Rapid Robert Tree Service to do some tree cleanup and maintenance around your home.
Ça c'est bien, that's right, and boy was I pleased.
Well, how's that? Tell us about it.
Well, I had noticed the trees I planted around my maison there, they was getting kind of tall and they grew up a lot over the years, and I didn't have the time or the tools or really the envie to trim those trees. So I called Rapid Robert Tree Service out at Cherry Point.
So after Rapid Robert Tree Service left, you got your rake and your shovel and your wheelbarrow and you cleaned up all the tree debris?
Oh, me P, no, I didn't have nothing to do there. They did everything for me. They bien pro. All I did was go fix me a little teeth Fred and sit on my swing and admire the newly trimmed trees and how good my place looked. Et si Rapid Robert peut pas le faire, mais ça peut pas être fait, mes amis.
Experienced, licensed, fully insured, free estimates. Call the professionals at Rapid Robert Tree Service at 337-407-2936. That's 407-2936.